All right, we are live. Welcome, Facebook. Glad you are here with us. So our Facebook audience, those that join us on Saturdays to watch us, thank you for being here with us. We just finished up some time of sharing and praying and we started a little bit late. We had an extended time of worship, but we are here now and we're ready to get into our message for today. So before I do that, I just want to share that there are some of you have been asking me, are there other places where you can watch these videos? So what I've begun doing is we have a YouTube channel. It is, and I was just telling our fellowship this, it's CC, the letter C as in cat, CC, and then TD, T as in Tom, D as in dog, CCTD TV. Okay, no dot, but CCTD TV, V as in Victor. All right. If you type that in, you go to YouTube, type in CCTD TV, it'll take you to our YouTube channel page, and you will see that there's actually a bunch of other videos there, and there is the last 4 videos of this teaching on the tithe. So they're now public. If you've got friends who are, and Karen just posted it on Facebook, for those of you that are, she posted it where you can find it. You can watch the videos, you can share them with your friends. They can share them with other people, and so on and so on and so on. So we're starting to upload more of them. There's also going to be another place we're going to make available for people to be able to watch a lot of our content. But this is a place you can get to immediately now as we're setting up other things. And I'll be uploading other videos, and this video today will be uploaded later tonight so that people can, or later this afternoon so people can watch it. All right, let's get into our message for today. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your Holy Spirit, who leads us and guides us into all truth. We thank you, Lord God, that you said that you would be our God and you would teach us. So we ask you right now, as David did, show us your ways, teach us your paths, lead and guide us into your truth and teach us. Open our eyes to behold wondrous things from your Torah, for you are the God of our salvation, and we wait upon you this day. Thank you for being our Father who teaches us and instructs us in his ways. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I'd like you to turn to Genesis chapter 14. I'm going to do a little quick recap of what we started talking about over a couple of weeks ago. We've been talking about the tithe. What place does the tithe, if any, does the tithe play in the life of the believer? One of the things that we have begun talking about is the fact that a lot of people say, well, tithing was before the law, so we should tithe because tithing is before the law. It is an eternal, universal principle that Christians are to follow if they want to be blessed. And we've been talking about this within the context of our larger series of Success and Prosperity, a Kingdom Perspective. As righteous people, and one of the ways that the Lord effects financial flourishing in the lives of others is through people who are righteous, who are redeemed. They're not going to be utilizing their resources, especially their financial resources and other resources according to the will of God, to be a blessing to other people. But what about the tithe? And that's what we've been asking. Is part of this as believers that we are supposed to tithe, we are obligated to tithe. As I have been saying, that what I've been saying over the past few weeks is I don't know of any Christian, I don't know of any church that tithes according to the scriptures, that tithes according to the will of God as laid down by the Mosaic laws, laid down by God in the Mosaic law for tithing. No one follows those instructions. No one. And I have often said in the past, if you did, your church would go broke if you tried to follow the tithing system as it's laid out in the law of Moses. Well, we covered all of that. Then we start talking about the fact, as I said earlier, people will often say in a lot of popular teaching, well, tithing was before the law, and therefore it is an eternal, universal principle that all people, especially believers, are obligated to keep. And so we start looking at this last week. We looked at scriptures that are often taught as proving that tithing is a universal, eternal principle and that we should practice it today. We looked at the supposed tithing practices of Adam and Eve. We looked at that last week, and Abel. And what we saw was we looked at that in depth and in detail, is that these passages do not speak of the tithe, and thus they don't prove that tithing is an eternal, universal, eternal principle. Those Adam and Eve, we said that there are those who said that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was a tithe. That was what they offered to God. Nothing in the text says that. There are those who say, well, Abel offered his first fruit of his flock to God. That was a tithe. We said, no, First fruits are not a tithe. He did offer the firstlings of his flock. He offered the fat, but it doesn't say it was a tithe. First fruits are not a tithe. We also looked at the tithe of Jacob. Look at the tithe of Jacob, because again, all of this, so first of all, let me say this, Adam and Eve and Abel, that was not tithe. Jacob we looked at, and we looked at the fact that he promised to God that he would tithe. And so there we actually do see tithing because it actually uses the word. But what we discovered was that Jacob's tithe was a conditional tithe. And it was based upon Jacob. What he said was, God, I will give you a tithe if you fulfill certain conditions first. That's why I said it's a conditional tithe. He said, God, if you would do these things, if you would watch over me, protect me, if you will bless me and bring me back to my father's house, then I will give you a tithe of all that I possess. So usually it's taught, if you want to be blessed, you must tithe. What we saw with Jacob is that Jacob was saying, God, if you bless me, then I will tithe, which is an exact opposite of what people tend to teach where the tithe was concerned. So Jacob was not following a command of God. He was not following a universal eternal principle in order to be blessed. Because again, what he was saying, he didn't say to God, God, I'm going to tithe because you're going to bless me. He didn't say, God, I'm going to tithe because this is what's commanded me, and I thank you that you're going to bless me. He said, no, what he said was, God, if you will bless me, and the blessing was you watch over me, you protect me, you prosper me, you bring me back home, then I will give you a tithe. Well, that's conditional. And these were conditions that Jacob set up. And as we saw last week, when you look at the timeline from Jacob's own mouth, it was 20 years before he actually got back home, which meant that his tithe would not have been given it would not be given until 20 years after he had said that, which means he was not tithing during that time period. He was not following a command. He was not following a universal eternal principle. So none of these examples that we looked at, Adam and Eve, Abel, or Jacob, those 4 examples from Genesis before the law, these are often taught in popular preaching and teaching as to why you must tithe. They can't be used as models that we are obligated, or they can't be used as a model to say, hey, this shows that this is a universal eternal principle that as believers, you're obligated to practice. If we've practiced Jacob's tithe, that means you and I would be going to God saying, hey, God, if you bless me, if you provide for my family, if you provide if you provide food and clothing and shelter and a home and a nice car, then God, I will give you a tithe. And I don't know anybody who teaches that. Okay. Usually what is taught is you want to be blessed, you got to tithe to God first. You give God your tithe, then you will be blessed. Jacob was the exact opposite. All right. So those examples from Genesis before the Torah, before the law, cannot be used as an example of a tithe. There was one tithing story, or one tithing incident, as I like to say, that we skipped over last week. And this story and example actually came before Jacob. This was the tithing incident of Abram, whom we later call Abraham. At this point in the story, though, when he gives the tithe, he is called Abram. Now, I skipped over this last week because I wanted to give more time to it, because there's a larger context we're going to look at, and it takes time to really bring it out. So I didn't want to have to cut it short and not finish it. I said I'll cover it next week. So we skipped over Abram's tithe. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at his story and see, does his story of tithing, does it provide the proof that we should tithe today, and that we should follow his example and tithe today? Now, there are those who say, yes, we should. He is the perfect example. He tithed before the law. He didn't make it conditional. We should follow his example. Let's look at this text, though, much more closely. And by the way, technically speaking, in terms of the first incident that we actually see of tithing, it's the story of Abraham. All right. Abraham came before Jacob. As we said, Adam and Eve, that was not a tithe. Abel was not a tithe. So the first actual incidence of and mention of the word tithing in scripture is in the story of Abraham in Genesis chapter 14. Now, we're not just going to go to Genesis chapter, actually we will first. Go to Genesis chapter 14, look at verse 18. Genesis 14 and verse 18 says this, then Melchizedek, king of Salem, I like to say Melchizedek, Hebrew, Melchizedek or Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. This is verse 18 of chapter 14. He was the priest of God Most High, and he blessed him, meaning Abraham, and said, blessed be Abram, actually it's Abram now, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. And he gave him a tithe of all. Now, again, people read this and they go, see, Abram gave a tithe of all. So it shows it's a universal eternal principle. Now, as I said last week, yes, tithing was before the law. There were other nations that tithed. Tithing was ubiquitous throughout the ancient Near East. However, there was no uniform custom for tithing. There are those who may have called it a tithe, but they tithe less than that. There are those who tithe only certain times of the year or certain time under certain circumstances. If this happened, then you're going to give this type of tithe. If that happens, you're going to give this type of tithe. So we just can't look at the fact and go, well, it was in the ancient Near East and people tithe. It was different. The custom was not uniform. It wasn't the same. There wasn't really an SOP, a standard operating procedure for tithing in the ancient Near East. But the tithe did exist. We see Abram here in Genesis 14 giving a tithe to Melchizedek. However, what we have to do again, if we're going to understand his tithe and what his tithe was about, we must look at and understand the historical and cultural context in which this tithe took place. In other words, there is a whole context surrounding this story that is usually ignored. And there are details to this context that are ignored when people talk about the tithe. So let's look at this. So we've read Genesis 14, verse 18, but again, it's set within a larger context. Let's go to chapter 14 again, go back to chapter 14 and look at verse 1. We're going to read verses 1 through 4. And it came to pass in the days of, I love these names, of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elazar, Kedor Laomer, king of Elam, and Tithe, king of nations, that they made war. Now, these are 4 kings who made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemimber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years, and it's talking about, when it says they, it's talking about the 5 kings that were just mentioned. Again, these were Bera, Birsha, Shinab, Shemimber, Shemiber, and Bela. These 5 kings had served Kedor Laomer for 12 years. And it says, and in the 13th year, they rebelled against him. So what was happening here is that, let's see, I got something going on here that I don't want going on here. Okay, there we go. What happened here is that you have these kings who were probably what we call vassal kings to a greater king, Kedor Laomer. He was the big king. Remember, we talked about you have a king known as a suzerain, who usually is a more powerful king, and then you have kings underneath him who are not as powerful. They usually create some sort of alliance, and they will be in service to that king. So you have the little kings, and then you have the big kings. Kedor Laomer was the big king. He probably was the suzerain. These other 5 kings were probably vassal kingdoms. They served him for 12 years. Well, for some reason, they got tired of serving him, and they decided they're going to rebel. We're not going to serve you anymore. They got together, these 5 kingdoms got together, these 5 kings and their kingdoms got together and decided we're going to rebel against Kedor Laomer and not serve you anymore. So they fought against him, and they lost the battle. If you look at chapter 14 again, look at verse 8. And the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and joined together in battle in the valley of Siddim against Kedor Laomer, king of Elam, Tithe, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elazar. 4 kings against 5. Okay, so these smaller kings, I should say, the vassal kingdoms are fighting against these 4 other kingdoms. So you got 5 kingdoms fighting against 4. And what happens, it says, now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the king of Sodom and Gomorrah fell. Some fell there, and the remainder fled to the mountains. Then the 4 kings, they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. Now, what happened was these 5 kings who rebelled fought against Kedorlaomer, and they lost. They were getting beaten. Okay, so they fled, and then Kedorlaomer and the other kings that were with him, the other 3 kings, they went and they ended up taking. They took over Sodom and Gomorrah. They took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all the provisions and went their way. So they conquered. The rest of the kings lost, and these kings conquered. So this was a war that's going on. This is the context. Historically, there is a war that is taking place. Now, what happens? They fight against these 5 kings, fight against the 4 kings. Specifically, they're fighting against Kedorlaomer. They're fighting against him. Evidently, they don't want him ruling over them anymore. They don't want to serve him. They lose the battle. Sodom and Gomorrah gets taken. As a result of this, Lot, Abraham's nephew, was living in Sodom and Gomorrah, and he gets taken. Remember, Lot had chosen to live in Sodom and Gomorrah. So he is taken captive. As a matter of fact, it goes on to say in verse 12 of chapter 14, they also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and they departed. You have to understand that so when they're taking this, they're not just taking stuff. Okay, and I'm gonna be a little bit funny here. They're not just taking the TV and the coffee table. They're taking everything. They're taking the people. They're taking the women, the children. They're taking everything from Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, and probably a little bit of this was the idea of, oh, so you're going to rebel against us? I tell you what, you won't have anything. We're going to take everything from you. And this is what is taking place. So as a result of this, Lot gets taken. He's taken captive. This is what caused Abraham to become aroused. He rises up. It arouses him, meaning that he's like, nope, this can't happen, because well, let's go back and read it. Go back and read it. It says, verse 13, then one who had escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Anar, and they were allies with Abram. Now, when Abram heard that his brother, that is his kinsman, Lot, was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants now Abraham had his own little small army, who were born in his own house, and he went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his forces against them by night. He and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So he brought back all the goods and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. Remember I said that the goods here, it's not just, the coffee end table, the television, the car. They took everything. They took everybody. So he brought all of this back, meaning Abraham, now the only reason Abraham is going out to do this is because his kinsman, Lot, has been taken captive. So he gets 300 of his own trained men that were raised in his own house. It was like Abraham, I'm going to use this in a positive sense, had his own little militia there. And he brought all those people, divided them, and they went and attacked these kings and overcame them. You have to understand the context here. So again, Kedorlaomer and his coalition of kings, there was 4 kings altogether. Kedorlaomer was the king. He had his coalition. They go against these 5 kings who rebel. They overcome these 5 kings, take all of their stuff. Lot is among them, because the king of Sodom is part of the kings who rebel. Lot is living in Sodom. Lot gets taken captive. Lot's family gets taken captive. The people of Sodom gets taken captive. Then what happens? Abraham finds this out. He says, nope, this is my kinsman. I can't permit this. He rises up. He gets the 300 of his own people, and they go against these 4 kings. They go against the coalition of the 4 kings who had conquered the 5 kings. Hear me. Abraham, or at this point, he's Abram. Abram raises up. He rises up. He rises up. He goes against the 4-king coalition, and he defeats them. And he is able to bring back all of the people who had been taken, all of the goods, the property that had been taken. He brings back Lot. He brings back the women. He brings back all of the people. Abram is the conquering hero in this story. Now that is the context, okay? The context The context before the giving of the tithe is a context of war. It's a context of war. This is important because often this is ignored. People will read it, but it doesn't play into how you're going to interpret what's going on when Abram meets with Melchizedek or Melchizedek. So it's a war that Abram fought and that he won. That is important. The reason I keep emphasizing that is so important because it's going to play into what we read Abram talking about, okay? And it's going to play into our understanding. It's going to enlarge our understanding of why he gave a tithe. So the context is important for understanding Abram's interaction with Melchizedek. It's important for our understanding of why he gave the tithe. And it's important for us to understand his interaction with the king of Sodom. So now, as we read chapter 14, all the way down to verse 16, let's read verse 17. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him, Abram, at the valley of Shaveh. That is the king's valley. After his return from the defeat of Kedor Laomer and the kings who were with him. As I said, Abraham won the battle. Verse 18, then I always say Melchizedek. Then Melchizedek or Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was the priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tithe of all. Here's a little maybe unknown fact that you may know. In verse 21, it says that he gave him a tithe of all. You know, the Hebrew here is actually ambiguous. The way it's written in Hebrew, we don't know who gave the tithe in Hebrew. When it says, and he gave him a tithe of all, did Melchizedek give a tithe to Abram, or did Abram give a tithe to Melchizedek? Based upon the Hebrew, you can't really tell, it's ambiguous. However, the context suggests that it is Abram who gave a tithe to Melchizedek. And Hebrews chapter 7 literally says, a commentary on this passage, that it was Abram who gave a tithe to Melchizedek. All right, so I accept that it was Abram who gave the tithe to Melchizedek because of the flow of the passage, because of the commentary that we have in the book of Hebrews. All right, so notice here that it says the kings came out to meet Abram. You have the king of Sodom, you have Melchizedek, who was the king of Salem, which later becomes Jerusalem, by the way. By the way, these are all Canaanite cities at this point. This is land that God in chapter 13 has promised to Abraham, but is not yet his land. This is the land of Canaan, which becomes the promised land for the people of Israel. Melchizedek is the king of Salem, which later becomes Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. All right. So Melchizedek brings out bread and wine. The king of Sodom is with him. He brings out bread and wine. Why would he bring out bread and wine? And notice he blesses Abraham. He says, blessed be Abram, blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. And I not really thought that much about this. Hang on for a second. Until I start studying this more in detail and in context. There's something interesting going on here. Why is he blessing him? He's saying, meaning when he's blessing him, he's saying something wonderful about him. He's saying something awesome about Abraham, okay? And he's pronouncing a blessing on him in the sense of not trying to give him a blessing, but announcing that Abram is in a state of blessedness because of his victory. Why is he doing this? Why does he bring the bread and the wine? What does the bread and the wine signify? According to Dr. John Walton in his commentary on Genesis, and this is the Genesis NIV application commentary, Dr. John Walton says this: Hittite treaties referred to the provision of food in wartime for one's allies. Now he's making a commentary on Melchizedek bringing bread and wine. So when we look at ancient Near Eastern treaties, especially among the Hittite, it would talk about people bringing a provision of food during times of war for one's allies. That is very important. Keep that in mind. You bring food for one's allies. According to Dr. Walton, what Melchizedek and the other kings are anxious to do is that they want to make peace with Abraham. with Abram. They want to secure him as an ally. This is why they're coming out there with bread and wine, and they're saying these, or Melchizedek is saying these wonderful things about Abram. They want to make sure that he's an ally, not an enemy. They want to secure him as an ally and not an enemy. To quote Dr. Walton again from the book, Genesis NIV Application Commentary, he says, quote, "The communal meal they share typically indicates a peaceful agreement. Melchizedek is anxious to make peace with such a proven military force." They're sharing a communal meal. What does a communal meal like this tends to signify during a time of war? Keep in mind the larger context. This is a time of war. It is indicating that they are making a treaty with one another, that they are making a covenant agreement with one another. Because again, they want to make sure that there is peace between them, these four kings, and Melchizedek. Want to make sure there is peace between them and Abram. Abram, keep in mind that Abram, with his forces, defeated the coalition of four kings. These were four kings that were mightier and superior than the five kings. Kedar Laomer and his other three kings, the coalition, they were stronger, they were mightier, they were superior than the five kings, right? We read that. Abram comes in and beats this superior force. They had lost to Abraham. So Abram, I keep saying Abraham, but it's Abram at this point. Abram had proven himself a superior military power to Kedar Laomer and his coalition. So Abram is powerful than the coalition of the four kings, who were more powerful than the coalition of the five kings. The four kings were more powerful than the five kings, but Abram was more powerful than the four kings, which means that Abram and his military force was more powerful than the five kings. Do you see why they would be worried? It's like, this dude defeated the guy who defeated us. So we want to make sure he's on our side. So they bring out wine. They bring a blessing. Why? They want to make a treaty of peace. They want to make sure that everything is copacetic between us and Abraham. We don't want to get into a fight with this guy. We want him to be our ally, not our enemy, because he has proven himself to be a superior military force. As a matter of fact, in the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Background Commentary, Volume 1, which actually you can see right here behind me, I got it here. Again, I always show you these things to show you where I'm getting this information from. But in Volume 1 of the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Background Commentary, this is what, again, Dr. Walton writes, the Genesis commentary portion. He writes, Abraham's success had signaled a shift of power in the region. And it appears that Melchizedek is taking the opportunity of the army's return, Abram's army, to explore what ambitions or loyalties Abram might have. Abram, who has shown himself by the defeat of Kedar Laomer, by defeating him, he has shown that he is the superior military force. He is stronger, he is mightier, he's greater than all of these other kings. Melchizedek is now concerned, rightly so. Where does his loyalties lie? What are his intentions? What are his ambitions? Now, Walton said that there was a shift of power in the region with Abraham's success had signaled, his defeat of the four kings had signaled a shift of power. What was the shift of power? Well, see, here you have to understand how it worked in the ancient Near East. It works this way today, technically, because Abram had conquered the kings who has conquered all, let me like this. Abraham conquered the coalition of four kings who had conquered the coalition of five kings. Whenever a king and his military would conquer a people, that land now belonged to the king. Whoever won the war, whoever conquered the people, that land now belonged to the conqueror. So when the four kings conquered the five kings, all of their land now belonged to Kedar Laomer. Follow me? Because he had conquered them, he led the coalition, he was in charge. He was the suzerain. He was the big king. He conquered the 5 kings with his coalition. So now all of their land belongs to him now. He's the conqueror. Abram comes in and conquers Kedorlaomer, meaning what? Now all that Kedorlaomer conquered and had gotten by conquest, it now belongs to Abraham. All of this land now belongs to Abraham. This is why there has now been a shift of power. It is a shift of political power. Now the political power has shifted from the 5, well, like this, the political power shifted from the 5 kings to the 4 kings, or specifically to Kedorlaomer. Kedorlaomer, when he's conquered by Abraham, that political power now shifts because now Abraham is in charge of all the land because he conquered it. Now it is shifted from Kedorlaomer to Abraham. He has now, he has the leverage of political power. Basically speaking, technically, according to the customs of war, he's in charge. He is in charge. So you see now why Melchizedek brings out the wine, he brings out the bread, he has a communal meal, he wants to make a treaty. He is not clear about what's Abram's intentions. Where does his loyalty lie? What are his ambitions? What is he going to do now that he is in charge and he's proven himself to be? Because they're not going to fight against him. He's already proven he can beat them because he beat Kedorlaomer. He has proven that he is the superior military force. They are not in a position of power. They are not even in a position of a negotiation. They don't have any leverage. The one who has all of the political power and leverage is Abram. He has all of the political power and leverage. So this is what's taking place. Again, this is the larger context. So John Walton again says in the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Background Commentary, he says, this has suddenly made Abram a political power to be reckoned with, and it explains Melchizedek's overtures. Now we know why. Remember I said he brings out bread and wine. Why? Why is he bringing this blessing? Because Abram is now in the position of political power. He has all the leverage. They have none. And they need to know, where do we stand in relation to you? They want to make a peaceful treaty, which is why you bring out the bread and the wine. They want him to be an ally. They want him to be an ally. They not a enemy. Okay. Somebody was writing to me in our Zoom that says, my footnote says that Melchizedek, they'll finish it. Okay, so Melchizedek, they are concerned. They want to know, where does he stand? See, it was in their best interest to make an ally of Abraham, to have him as a friend, not as a foe. So again, they wanted to know, where do you stand? Where do we stand in relation to you? Where do you stand in relation to us? What are your intentions? What are your ambitions? So they're seeking to make a peaceful agreement, a treaty with Abraham, because they see him now. You are the conqueror. You hold all the political power. You hold the leverage. So then after this happens, this is verse 18, verse 19, and verse 20. At the end of verse 20, it says, in the midst of all this, so you got all this context now, right? All this historical and cultural context. This is how things are done in the ancient Near East. It says he, Abram, gives a tithe of all to Melchizedek. He gives Melchizedek a tithe of all. Oh, I see. Somebody says, someone in our Zoom, in our fellowship said that my footnote says that Melchizedek is a type of Christophany or the pre-incarnate Christ. There is a lot, which I'm not going to get into that because it kind of takes away from what I'm focusing on here. Probably another time we'll cover this. There are those who believe that this was a pre-incarnation of Christ, that this was actually Christ. I don't believe that. Actually, when you start to do the historic, now I believe later on, and when you trace the history, and I've done some research on this and began tracing the history, Melchizedek does become a type of Christ. We see this in the book of Hebrews. And you have to understand, it's not just in the book of Hebrews, but through Jewish history and theology, Melchizedek, this mysterious figure that is only mentioned, I think twice in the Bible, here in Genesis and then in the Psalms, a whole lot of legends grow up around him. There's a whole mythos that grows up around Melchizedek. So by the time we get to the second century, the first century of the time of Jesus during the Second Temple period, Melchizedek is seen as a different type of figure, an almost mystical, supernatural figure, okay? He is, according to the book of Hebrews, a type of Christ, or his priesthood is a type of Christ. Was this Jesus, was this a pre-incarnation of Jesus? I don't believe so. I remember growing up, I was always taught that this is a pre-incarnation of Jesus. Actually, when you do the research, what you find out is that Melchizedek, based upon the research, if you do the research, I read a scholar who said this, and I thought, I don't see that. And I went and did the research and went, oh, I see how he said this. Melchizedek, historically speaking, from the information that we can gather that's in the text, was actually probably a pagan king who worshiped a pagan god. And then you may go, wait, what? I'm talking about when you do the historical research based upon the evidence that we have in the text, you start looking at it linguistically, you start looking at his name, Melchizedek, and you start looking at what he said to Abram. It is very, very possible, given the evidence, that this was not a high priest of Yahweh, the God of Israel, but he was a high priest of a Canaanite god. He said, but Mike, he says to Abram in verse 19, blessed be Abram of God Most High. That's on our English Bible. In the Hebrew, it is blessed be Abraham of El Elyon. He said, well, Mike, yeah, that's one of the names of God, El Elyon. But El Elyon was also the name of a Canaanite god. One of the names of, he is called Melchizedek. Well, the reason I call Melchizedek, it's Melchi, my king is Zedek, righteous. Now, there's different ways scholars have looked at this. They could go, that he's saying, my king, that is me, Melchizedek is righteous, or Melchizedek, my king, is someone named Zedek. Zedek was the name of a Canaanite god. So it could very well be. Scholars are a little bit divided on this. There are some who says, no, I read some scholars just last night who said, no, he knows God. He is a high priest of the Most High God before the Levitical priesthood. There are scholars who believe that. There are other scholars with good evidence, when you look at it, that says, now this is a Canaanite pagan king. Is it possible that he was a worshiper of the one true God? Very possible. Remember Moses' father-in-law, Jethro? He was a priest of Midian. It appears that he worshiped Yahweh, the God of Israel, as the true God. It is, Abraham came from a family of idol worshipers, yet Abraham came to worship the one true God. So it's very possible that there were other people who were worshiping the one true God. It's very possible that Melchizedek was a worshiper of the one true God. It is also very possible that he was a Canaanite pagan king who worshiped a paganite god. Why do I say that also? Here's another reason why. Notice it said, blessed be Abraham of El Elyon. Remember we said El Elyon could be the name of a pagan god, could be a reference to a pagan god, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be El Elyon, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. And he gave him a tithe of all. Now in verse 22, Abram says to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand, now notice this, to the Lord El Elyon. There's something added here that Melchizedek did not add. Melchizedek simply said, blessed be Abraham of El Elyon. Abraham says, I have raised my hand to Yahweh, the Yahweh El Elyon, the possessor of heaven and earth. In other words, Abraham, who's worshiping what would later become known as the true God, the one God of Israel, because remember, people worship many different gods. Before Abraham worshiped Yahweh, he had worshiped other gods, come from a family of idol worshipers. But now he worships the Lord El Elyon. In other words, it'd be like Abraham saying, okay, Melchizedek says, El Elyon, the Most High God, the Most High God. And by the way, by saying the Most High God, what's the implication? There are other gods, but there's one who's above them all, El Elyon. And this is the belief. El Elyon has given you this victory. It's like Abraham is saying, yes, the Most High God did give me the victory. Let me tell you who he really is. He's Yahweh. He's not Baal. He's not Zedek. He's Yahweh. He's the one true God. He is the Most High God, and he has given me the victory. This is very similar to where you see in the book of Acts, where the Apostle Paul goes to a city and they have an altar to the unknown God. Remember that story in the book of Acts? And Paul says, let me tell you who this unknown God is. It's almost like Abram is saying to Melchizedek, if it is true that Melchizedek is a Canaanite pagan god, he's saying, you are attributing my victory to the Most High God. Let me tell you who the Most High God truly is. And I'm paraphrasing that based upon the fact that he goes, Yahweh El Elyon, Yahweh the Most High God. That's who the true Most High God is. Now, again, there are those who believe that, and this is, for me, is one of the reasons I believe that Melchizedek may have been a Canaanite priest, a high priest who worshiped pagan gods. However, if we get more evidence, or if people say, like I said, there are those who say, no, he probably is worshiping the one true God. That can be said too. So I would accept that too, if that is the case. In other words, I won't quibble over it and go like, no. I'm just letting you know what the options are, okay? So for this, somebody in our one of our members said, thank you. It always makes sense when you explain it. So I wasn't going to get into that, but I wanted to explain that to you because, see, for me, this type of stuff gets exciting. I go like, oh, wow. When you start looking into depth and you start looking into the context, historical, cultural, linguistic, you start looking at the language, you start to see more things than what you began to realize. So in this context, again, what we're seeing is that Abraham offers this tithe. It is within the context of a war that has taken place. Abram is now in a position of political power. He, technically speaking, according to the customs of war in the ancient Near East, he is now in charge of all of this land. This is the same land in chapter 13 that God promises him that will belong to him and to his descendants. Same land. This is the land of Canaan. He has conquered. Now, keep in mind, Abram, the reason he went against Kedar Laomer was not to take the land. It wasn't for conquest of the land. It was to rescue his nephew Lot. But in rescuing his nephew Lot, he ended up conquering all of these kings. This wasn't a situation where it's a snatch and grab. We're going to sneak in there and grab Lot and get him out. No, he went in, fought a battle, defeated these kings. Now he is in the position of political power. And so Melchizedek knows this. He brings out the bread and the wine to make a treaty with him of peace, because he wants him as a friend, not as a foe. And so they make a treaty with Abraham. It's in their best interest. So within this war context, we now get in a large understanding of why Abram gave Melchizedek the tithe. First of all, let me say this. There's a scholar by the name of Andre Wenin. Hope I'm pronouncing his last name right, W-E-N-I-E. He wrote an article called The Encounter of the Encounter of Abram and Melchizedek, King of Salem, a covenant establishing ceremony. He sees what's taking place here as the establishment of a covenant. And this is from a book called Studies in the Book of Genesis, Literature, Redaction, and History. All right. So this scholar, I believe Dr. Andre Wenin said, Abram's tithe, quote, Abram's tithe may also be explained as a gift accompanying a treaty ceremony. So he sees this, again, this is based upon the cultural context. Abraham is in a position of political power. Melchizedek brings out bread and wine, which is usually a sign that he is making a treaty, a covenant. Abraham's tithe can be explained as a gift that is accompanying the making of this agreement. So the tithe, which comes out of war, is a gift to Melchizedek as a gift that becomes a part of the covenant or the treaty ceremony, okay? Keep in mind again, technically, Abram is the one who's in the position of superior power. he is the one in position of superior power. But in giving the tithe of the war spoil, and it's a tithe of the war spoil, this is not a tithe from Abram's personal possession. This is a tithe of the spoils of war. Remember, he got all of the people, all of the goods, all of the land. So he takes a tithe of all of that and he gives it to Melchizedek. This acknowledges, by giving Melchizedek this tithe, it acknowledges and shows respect for Melchizedek's position and power as a priest king. Keep in mind, Melchizedek is a priest king. Back in this time period, in the ancient Near East, kings and priests, they could be both. Kings could be priests, and there were priests who were kings. There were king priests or priestly kings. Okay, Melchizedek is a priestly king. He's either a priestly king of the one true God, or he's a priestly king of a pagan god. Either way, he is a king over a kingdom, and he is a priest. By giving him a tenth of the war spoil, during this covenant ceremony, he gives it to him as a gift. He is showing Melchizedek respect for his office and his position. He's saying, I recognize that you are the king. You are probably the prominent king here, because he's the one who comes out. He's the one who initiates the ceremony. Notice the king of Sodom comes out. The king of Sodom comes out, but he's not saying anything. He's there, but he's not saying anything yet. He's getting ready to. Melchizedek initiates the ceremony. Abraham shows him dignity. He respects him. He shows him respect. He shows him dignity. He shows him honor by giving him 10%, giving him a tithe of the war spoil. And you got to keep that in mind, because we're going to bring something else into this. Okay. So what is he doing? He is humbling himself, even though he is in the position of superior power, even though he has the political leverage and strength because he's defeated everybody. He humbles himself to Melchizedek, and in doing this, he's assuring him of his peaceful intentions. Remember, we said before, based upon what some other scholar says, they are anxious, they are concerned. Hey, Abraham has defeated all of these other kings. He is now the power has shifted. He has all the political power here. He's the one that's in charge. What is his intention towards us? Abraham begins to show his intention. He gives a tenth to the king, which shows him honor, which shows him respect. And by doing this, he's respecting his position and power. He's basically saying to him, I've not come to take over. And I'm going to prove this to you even more as we look at it. He is saying to him, by doing this, I'm not going to rule over you. I've not come to rule over you. One of the ways he's showing that is by giving him a tenth. He is respecting, he is honoring Melchizedek as a king and a priest. Even though Abraham technically is the one in the position of superiority because of his conquest, he is saying to Melchizedek, he's allaying his fears or laying his fears. I'm not here to take over. I'm not here to be king over you and everyone else, to be king over you and the other 5 kings. I will be your ally. Let's make so he gives him a gift to affirm the treaty that they want to make with him. Does that make sense? Are you following me? If you're following me, you're watching on Facebook going, yeah, that makes sense, Mike, I'm following you. Okay, so he's showing that he's an ally. He's not a threat to their power. He's not a threat to their position. By offering this tithe, he shows that he's not a threat to their power or their position. Now, there was a custom. There's something else to prove this. There was a custom in the ancient Near East of sharing the spoils of war with those who were left behind and who did not fight in the war for whatever reason. There were times you might go to war, and then as you're going to war, certain people were either left behind or they didn't go for whatever reason, but you were to share the spoils of war with them. We see this in the story of David. If you go to 1 Samuel chapter 30, 1 Samuel chapter 30. Now, I'm saying this to you to show that what's taking place here is a treaty that is being made to establish an alliance, to establish friendship, to make Abraham their friend, not their foe, their ally, not their enemy. And that Abraham is going along with this. He is showing them, I'm not here to rule over you. I'm not a threat to your power or to your position. In 1 Samuel, and what I'm saying here is that the giving of the tenth of the war spoil, it expresses this. 1 Samuel chapter 30. I want you to look at verse 7. Now, if you know this story, in 1 Samuel chapter 30, the Amorites, the Amalekites had come to David's village of Ziklag, and they had attacked the city, the village. They had taken all the children, all the women, and carried them off. David had been somewhere else. They came back. David went to the Lord in verse 7 and said, then David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, please bring the ephod here to me. Abiathar brought the ephod to David. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this troop? Shall I overtake them? It's almost like, is this worth my time to do this? And the Lord answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. So David went, he and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, where those stayed who were left behind. Notice, David has 600 men. They came to this brook called Besor, and there stayed behind some of the men. It says, verse 10, but David pursued, he and 400 men, for 200 stayed behind, who were so weary that they could not cross the brook Besor. So there were 200 men who became so tired, they said, we can't go on. So they stayed behind. And David and the 400 other men kept going. All right, now let's look at verse 16. What happens here, verse 16, is that there was an Egyptian, a servant of an Amalekite, who had been left behind. He gives David information as to where they're at. Verse 16 says, and when he, the Amalekite, when he had brought him down, they were there, the Amalekites were there, spread out all over the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil which they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. Now notice, not only have they taken David's stuff, his spoil, the goods, the women, the children, they have also taken from the Philistines and from the land of Judah. Then David, verse 17, David attacked them from twilight until the evening of the next day. Not a man of them escaped except for 400 young men who rode on camels and fled. So David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his two wives. Now keep in mind, they not only have recovered all that was taken from them, they've also recovered all that they had been taken from the Philistines and from Judah. So they are bringing back more than what had been originally taken from them. So again, verse 18, so David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his two wives, and nothing of theirs was lacking, either small or great, sons or daughters, spoil, or anything which they had taken from them. David recovered all, and then David took all the flocks and herds that they had driven before those other livestock and said, this is David's spoil. Okay, so David's taking his part. All right, now look at verse 21. Now David came to the 200 men who had been so weary that they could not follow David, whom they also made to stay at the brook Besor. These are those who stayed behind. So they went out to meet David, these 200 men, and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near, the people greeted them. When David came near the people, he greeted them. Verse 22, then all the wicked and worthless men of those who went with David answered and said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except for every man's wife and children, that they may lead them away and depart. So some of these men who were with David said, we're not sharing with them. They didn't do anything. They didn't fight. No, just give them what's there. Give them their wives, give them their children. We're keeping everything else. It probably was included in that. Give them their wives and their children and the stuff that was already there. But the rest of the stuff that we got, no, we're not sharing it with them. Verse 23, but David said, my brethren, you shall not do so with what the Lord has given us, who has preserved us and delivered into our hands the truth that came against us. For who will heed you in this manner? But as his part is who goes down to the battle, so shall his part be who stays by the supplies. They shall share alike. So it was from that day forward, he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel to this day. So here we see this ancient Near Eastern custom that I referred to earlier, where those who went to battle had to share with those who stayed behind. All right. Go to Joshua chapter 22. Joshua chapter 22. I want to show you another example of this. Again, is this making sense? Are you following me? If you are, go, yep, Mike, I'm with you. Joshua chapter 22. Let's look at verse 7. Joshua 22, verse 7. Now, again, this is dealing within the context of what do you do with spoils of war? Now, Joshua gives some examples. Some instructions. Now, to half the tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given a possession in Bashan. But to the other half of it, Joshua gave a possession among their brethren on this side of the Jordan, westward. So you had a tribe. If you go back and you remember, the tribe of Manasseh split. Some stayed on one side of the Jordan. Some came on the other side where they were going to the promised land. So it says, so it goes on to say, and indeed, when Joshua sent them away to their tents, he blessed them. And he spoke to them saying, return with much riches to your tents, with very much livestock, with silver, with gold, with bronze, with iron, and with very much clothing. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brethren. Now, these are those who have gone out to fight. As they're coming back, he said to the tribe of Manasseh, you have gone out, but there are those of your brethren who've stayed behind. You are to share the spoil with them. So this is even earlier than David. This is what I'm saying. This is a custom of the land, apparently. This is a custom of the ancient Near East. One scholar, Russell Kelly, calls it an Arab custom, that you share with those who have stayed behind. For whatever reason, you are to share with them. Let me show you one more example from the Torah, Numbers chapter 32. And I'm just establishing that this was something that was in play. Numbers chapter 32. Look at verse 25. Numbers 32, verse 25. It says, am I in the right place here? Hang on, let me make sure I got the right place. Okay, just want to make sure I have the right place. Sorry for that dead air there. Okay, so verse 25 says, and the children of Gad and the children of Reuben spoke to Moses. This is Numbers 32, verse 25. The children of Gad and the children of Moses spoke. The children of Gad and the children of Reuben spoke to Moses, saying, your servants would do as my Lord commands. Our little ones, our wives, our flock, and all of our livestock will be there in the cities of Gilead. But your servants will cross over, every man armed for war, before the Lord to battle, just as my Lord says. So Moses gave command concerning them to Eleazar the priest, to Joshua the son of Nun, and to the chief fathers of the tribe and of the children of Israel. And Moses said to them, if the children of Gad and the children of Reuben cross over the Jordan with you, every man armed for battle before the Lord, and the land is subdued before them, you shall give them the land of Gilead as a possession. But if they do not cross over armed with you, they shall have possession among you in the land of Canaan. Then the children of Gad and the children of Reuben answered, saying, as the Lord said to your servant, we will do. We will cross over armed before the Lord into the land of Canaan, but the possession of our inheritance shall remain with us on this side of the Jordan. Let's see. Okay, so here again, we see that there was supposed to be a division when the land is subdued. There is a division of the land. Okay, there's one more here too that I wanted to show you. Let me see. Why is this doing this? Okay, all right. Let me make sure I have the right passage here. And hang on just one sec, because it looks like I left out something out of my, oh, okay, there it is. Is this it? Let's see. Just want to make sure because I want to read you one more thing before we move on here. Okay, that's what I wanted to read you. I think what it was, I had Numbers 32, supposed to be Numbers 31. That's what I was supposed to read to you. Numbers 31. I knew there was something wrong here. Numbers 31, Okay, that's what I want to read. Numbers 31. It's not 32, it's 31. Numbers 31, verse 25. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, count up the plunder that was taken of man and beast, you and Eleazar the priest, and the chief fathers of the congregation. Divide the plunder into two parts, between those who took part in the war, who went out to battle, and all the congregation. And levy a tribute for the Lord on the men of war who went out to battle, one of every 500 of the persons, the cattle, the donkeys, and the sheep. Take it from their half and give it to Eleazar the priest as a heave offering to the Lord. So notice what's being said here. Those who go out to war, when they bring back the spoils, you are to take a portion of the spoils and give it to Eleazar the priest. Eleazar did not go out to war, but the priest did. So take it from their half, give it to, the men of Israel did, the armies did. Take it from their half and give it to Eleazar the priest as a heave offering. Notice he's giving it to the priest. The men of war are bringing back a portion of the war spoil and giving it to the priest. What is Melchizedek? Melchizedek. He is a king priest. Here they're taking a portion of the war spoil and giving it to the priest. Verse 30, and from the children of Israel half, you shall take one of every 50 drawn from the persons, the cattle, the donkeys, and the sheep, from all the livestock, and give them to the Levites who keep charge of the tabernacle of the Lord. So Moses and Eleazar the priest did as the Lord commanded Moses. Okay, so what we have here and what we're seeing again is this idea of those who go out to war are to share with those who stayed behind. Here in this particular instance, with those who go to war, you take a portion of it and give it to the Levites, the priestly tribe, and to Eleazar, who is the priest for Israel. You see what I'm saying? So this is what's taking place. Now, why is all of this important? Why did I have you read all of this? Is to show you that there was a custom of sharing the spoils of war with those who didn't go out to war. There was a custom. We see it in Joshua. We see it in Numbers. We saw it with David. In the Bible background commentary by Dr. John Walton, Dr. Victor A. Matthews, and Mark W. Chavalis, they write concerning this passage. They say the injunction to share the loot signifies the unity of the tribes in their common effort and was conducive to later cooperation. Let me read this again. The injunction that we just read here, the injunction to share the loot signifies the unity of the tribes in their common effort and was conducive to later cooperation. So the sharing of the spoils of war, okay, this is all the loot, sometimes referred to as the booty that they got, the spoils of war. It was gathered in. You take a portion of it. Some was to go to the priest, some was to go to some went to the Levites, and then some went to the priest. We saw with David, those who went was to share with those who stayed behind. We saw this in Joshua. Those who went were to share with those who stayed behind. The sharing of the spoils of war signifies and expresses unity, and it creates conditions for later cooperation. So this is one of the reasons this was being done, because it signifies, hey, we're one, we're allies, and also it helps to solidify cooperation later on if we need one another's help. This is why this was done. So this is what we see with Abram and his giving of the tithe to Melchizedek, or to Melchizedek. He is showing, or he is affirming his alliance, his peaceful agreement with Melchizedek and the other kings, and he's acknowledging Melchizedek's status as a priest and king. He's acknowledging, hey, you're a priest, you're a king, I'm going to give you a portion, a tenth. And one scholar has said that while in Israel, you did give a tenth of the spoils of war. As a matter of fact, I think it was under the Mosaic law, the spoils of war that you gave to the Levites was only 1% of war spoil, and then you gave 1/10 of 1% to the priest. So under the Mosaic law, spoils of war, you only gave 1/10, you gave 1% of war spoils to the Levites. So you had all your war spoil, you took 1% of that, you gave it to the Levites. And then you took 1/10 of 1% and you gave that to the priests, but you still shared with them. You still share with them. One of the things that, as I'm looking at this, is that God had set up this wonderful and somewhat elaborate system to make sure that people were provided for in Israel. Because remember, again, priests had no land. Okay, so they couldn't take care of themselves because they did not possess land themselves. So God made provision for them to make sure they were taken care of, as well as for, like we said before, fathers, widows, and strangers. But this were laws dealing specifically with spoils of war. In Israel, did they give 1/10 of the spoils of war? No, they were only commanded to give 1% to the Levites and 1/10 of 1% to the priests. One scholar has said that outside of the Mosaic covenant, it appears that it was 10% that was to be given to the king or to the priest that was in charge of the particular region where they were at. So Abraham, because this was the region in which he fought, he is recognizing Melchizedek as the king and priest. He gives him 10%. Again, as we read before, one scholar said this is probably also a gift. So it's probably both a custom of the area, of the surrounding culture. It was part of the surrounding culture, but they're also making a treaty. So Abraham gives this. He's going to give him probably. He is going to give him. I should say not probably. He is going to give him 1/10. The purpose of the 10th that Abraham gives is part of the custom of giving to those who stayed behind. We do not read that Melchizedek went to war. He was one who stayed behind, but he's a king in that region. So what does Abram do? He gives him 1/10. And by giving him 1/10, he's showing I'm your ally. Remember we said that the purpose of the war spoil offering, it was to signify unity and create conditions of cooperation. What is Melchizedek and the other kings wanting to establish with Abram? They want to establish you are a friend, not a foe. You're an ally, not an enemy. Abraham shows this by giving 1/10. He's operating according to the custom of the land. He says, you stay behind, but I'm going to give you Melchizedek. And remember, he's giving this to Melchizedek. He's not giving it to the other kings. Now you go, well, doesn't he show that he's an ally of theirs? I'm going to show you what he does to show that he's an ally of them. But to show Melchizedek, who did not go to war, who stayed behind, that they are in cooperation with one another, that they are allies, not enemies, that they are a friend, that he's a friend, not a foe. Abraham gives him 1/10. And in giving him 1/10, he is recognizing him as king over that region. He is showing him respect. He's showing him honor. He's recognizing him as king and priest and showing him respect and honor. Does that make sense? Those of you in the Zoom room, does that make sense? Okay. So I know there's a lot here, but I'm trying to break it down to make it so we can all get it. All right. So Abraham gives the 10th to Melchizedek. It's part of the culture of the time. It is to establish unity. It is to establish cooperation. It is a gift that is probably given with the treaty or covenantal ceremony that they are engaged in. So again, this is a custom to solidify and maintain unity and cooperation. So Abraham's tithe, let me say this again, it was not a tithe of his own personal property. This was a tithe of the spoils of war in keeping with ancient Near Eastern customs and to affirm his peace alliance with Melchizedek, who was the king over that particular region of Jerusalem. All right. Now, he's also going to do something to show his allegiance and that he is a friend, not a foe, to the other kings. Go back to Genesis chapter 14 again. Look at verse 21, because he gives the tithe only to Melchizedek. What does he give to the king of Sodom? Look at chapter 14, verse 21. Chapter 14, because remember, it's the king of Sodom who has his stuff taken. Chapter 14, verse, oops, I'm not in Genesis anymore, I'm in Numbers. So go to Genesis. We're almost done here. I hope you find this interesting. Genesis chapter 14 and verse 21. Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons and take the goods, all the stuff, for yourself. But Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord God Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth. Meaning, I have made a vow that I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except only what the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. So, in closing, we're closing up here. What happens? Notice that Abraham gives everything back to the king of Sodom. The king of Sodom had lost everything. The king of Sodom comes to Abram and says, listen, you keep all the stuff, just give me the people back. What does Abraham say in verse 22 and 23? He says, I made a vow to God that, basically he's saying this, I made a vow to God that I would not use this conquest as a means to enrich myself. That's what he's saying to God. I made a vow. That's what he's saying to the king. I made a vow to God. He says, I raised my hand, which means he made a vow to God, to Yahweh, God Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you say, I have made Abraham rich. So Abraham was committed to not becoming rich off of this conquest. And becoming rich and wealthy also means possessing political power. Keep in mind, he's conquered all the other kings and all the lands. He says, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to take it. Now, keep in mind, keep saying that, keep in mind, this is the land that God promised Abraham. But Abraham says, I'm not going to take it now. I'm not going to take it in this way. And so he says, I'm not going to keep anything that is yours. And he says to him, I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap. Okay? Now, this was used in the ancient Near East. I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap. It was a way of formally relinquishing all claims to land or provisions. Let me say this again. This phrase, I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, was used in the ancient Near East. It was a formula that you used to formally relinquish all claim to land or provisions. There were other ways that people would utilize this formula. They would say things like, I will take nothing from you, be it a blade of grass or a straw or a piece of string. Or they would say, I will take nothing from you, be it a blade of straw or a splinter of wood. So there was this formula. It was like a legal formula that people would make when they would make an agreement. See, and we have documents of ancient kings doing this as an act of magnanimity and nobility or honor. There were kings who do this who were being very generous. Powerful kings would do this. So there was one king in particular. Let me see, do I have his name right here? It's a very difficult name to pronounce. Let me see if I have it. Yes. There was a king by the name of Shupilu-Liuma. Shupilu-Liuma. He was a great king. He had as a vassal, he was a suzerain, he was a mighty powerful king. He had as a vassal a smaller king that he had basically made a covenant with. This king was named Nik-Madu. Nik-Madu had gotten attacked by another neighboring king, okay? They came and took all of his stuff, Nik-Madu stuff. This is the smaller king who doesn't have much power. So what does he do? He calls upon his big king, Shipulu-Liuma. He calls upon him and he says, come and help me. So Shipulu-Liuma goes, attacks this other king who had attacked Nik-Madu, and he gets all of Nik-Madu's stuff back. All right? Gets the land back, gets the stuff back. Nik-Madu is so gracious, he brings a bunch of his stuff, a bunch of provisions, silver, gold, other things, and he says, we're going to give it to Shipulu-Liuma, hope I pronounced that correctly. We're going to give it to him. And Shipulu-Liuma says, no, I will not take from you, I believe it was, I will not take from you a blade or a straw or even a piece of string. It is all yours. He basically says the exact same thing as Abraham. He relinquishes, by saying that, it's a formal, it is a formal, what's the word I want to use? It's a formal declaration when you are relinquishing. See, you know how today you go to a court And by the way, this would be used for division of land between husbands and wives or business partners. And they would say things like, be it a blade of grass or a straw or piece of string, I will not take from you. It was a way of dividing provision. It was a way of relinquishing provision. It was a legal declaration. So keep in mind what's going on here. They're making a covenant. A covenant is a legal contract, for lack of a better term. They're making a legal contract. And so in the midst of this ceremony, Abraham makes a legal formal declaration. When the king says, you bring me the people, by the way, part of the way it worked in the ancient world, when you would conquer a people, many times what was to be done is you would send the people back, but you keep all the stuff. That was the normal custom. So when the king of Sodom comes and says, hey, bring me all the people, he's operating according to an ancient Near Eastern custom. You give me the people, you can keep all the stuff. But Abraham is acting like the generous, magnanimous kings of the ancient Near East. There are other kings who did this. Wasn't a lot of them, but there were kings who did this. And he says, no, I'm not going to keep anything. I'm not, again, to quote him, he says, I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap. I will not take anything. This includes your stuff, your land. I'm not going to take any of it, lest anyone say, a man has made Abraham rich. He says, and I swore this to God. So Abraham relinquishes all of ownership. The only thing he said was, look, the only thing that we will have kept is what the young men have eaten and the portion of the men who went with me. They've already eaten some stuff to keep them strong. That's the only thing we'll take. But the rest, we're giving it all back. He didn't even keep a tithe for himself. Remember David, when he had the spoil, David took a portion for himself. He said, this is David's portion. Abraham didn't even do that. What did Abraham do with what would have been his portion? He gives it to Melchizedek. He says, here, you take this. I'm not keeping any of it. He relinquishes, listen, in relinquishing the property, in relinquishing, the goods, the property, he is relinquishing political power. Abraham is giving up all the political power. So he's establishing with them, I'm not here to rule over you. I'm not going to take your properties. I'm not going to take your lands. I'm not going to be a suzerain over you. I'm giving it all back to you. You rule over yourselves. You rule over your kingdoms. I'm not taking anything from you, lest any man says that they have made Abraham rich and great. He says, no, that's coming from God to me, not from you. I'm giving it all back. This is why he gives the tithe. This is why he gives it all back to them. And what this does, by giving everything back, it established Abram as what one scholar, Yochanan Mufs, there's this book that I have here by Yochanan Mufs. He's a Jewish scholar. It's called Law, Language, and Religion in Ancient Israel. And Yochanan Mufs has an article called Abraham, the Noble Warrior. By giving everything back, Abraham establishes himself as a noble warrior. He establishes himself as a man of honor. He establishes himself as a man of dignity and worth and value. He has a kingly status. What's interesting here is that if you go back to chapter 14 and verse 13, this is when knowing some of these things, it gives you a little bit more understanding of what's going on in the text, and it provides some more insight. Verse 13 of chapter 14 says, then one who had escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre. Notice he's called Abraham the Hebrew. Scholars are united in saying this is not, for the most part, this is not a ethnic designation. This is not referring to Abraham as a Hebrew, as it later would be referred to the people of Israel, as Hebrews. Like Paul referred to himself, I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. This is actually a reference to Abraham's status. Okay, it's not speaking of him ethnically. He's a Hebrew or an Israelite. So it's not Hebrew equals Israelite. It's not that. This was a term, Ivri, this was a term that was used to speak of people who were unsettled. They weren't settled. They were strangers. They were foreigners. They were travelers. It was used of nomads. It was used of people who were seen as being reckless renegades. It was basically, if you had this title, you were seen as possessing low status, low dignity. So Abraham is known as the Hebrew. Remember, he's left his father, he's left his land, he's left his people. These are all of the things that brings you honor. He's left all that behind. So he is in a social position of possessing low honor and dignity. Why is that important? Because when Abraham, and this is what the story, when you understand the cultural context, when the story shows Abraham, who is now in a position of power, because he's conquered all of these kings, and he gives everything back, and he forms and he shows respect and dignity to Melchizedek. And even though technically, in terms of his conquest, Abram is the superior one, but he humbles himself and he shows respect to Melchizedek, and he gives all the land and all the goods back to the king of Solomon. Abraham raises his status. He is now seen as a noble warrior. He is now socially no longer a Hebrew. He is a man, in other words, no longer a person of low social rank. He is now a person of high dignity and respect. All right. So this is what's going on. This is what's taking place. This is what Yochanan Muffs in his article, he calls Abraham the noble warrior. He's a warrior of honor. And remember, honor is one of the most important values in the first century world. So the reason the tithe was given was to establish that covenant alliance. It was Abraham's way of saying, I'm not your enemy, I'm your ally. I'm not your foe, I'm your friend. And I have promised God that I'm not going to take anything. I'm not going to exert power and authority over you, even though technically by right I could do that. I'm giving everything back. Never let it be said that anyone raised me up and made me rich. It was God. So Abram, yes, he did tithe before the law. This is in closing. But we cannot use his example of tithing for believers today, because this was a spoil of war tithe. It was not tithe from his personal property. We don't read of Abraham giving any other tithes to Melchizedek. Matter of fact, in the book of Hebrews, when it says he gave him tithes of all, actually in the Greek, it's he gave him a tithe of all. It's singular, not plural. Okay. Some English translations translate it as tithes, but it's singular. He gave them a tithe of all. So this was a spoil of war tithe, and it was given according to ancient Near Eastern custom. It was given as a gift to affirm peaceful agreement between Abraham and the kings of that region. And also the way he affirmed his agreement with them was by giving them everything back. Abraham, when he relinquished all goods, all property, all land, he was relinquishing all political power. He was saying, I'm not going to rule over you. I am not going to be Kedor Laomer to you. I'm not going to rule over you. So you can be at rest. You know my intentions. You know my ambition. I've given everything back. If we were to follow Abraham's example, because people say, well, we got to follow Abraham's example. Here's the thing. If you were to follow Abraham's example and you truly followed Abraham's example, this is what you got to do. First of all, you got to give 10%. Come to church, give your 10%. Then on Monday morning, you got to take your paycheck, take it back to your boss and say, I've made a vow to God that I'm not going to take anything from this company. Never let it be said that any person is going to make me rich. So you give all of your money back. So you don't keep the tithe, you don't keep any of the paycheck. If you're going to follow Abraham's example. Abraham did that. He gave up everything. Now, here's the thing. This is something we can learn from Abraham. Abraham was a man of honor. He did not grasp for power. Karen and I were talking about this. I don't have time to go into all of this because I'm already an hour and 20 minutes into this, but I'll just say this. By relinquishing all rights to the land and the goods, he was giving up power. He was giving up political power over the kings. He did not lust after power. He did not try to fulfill God's promise to him in his own way. Dr. John Walton brings out this in his commentary on Genesis, and he says, we see this pattern in other people's lives. For instance, King David, before he was king. When Saul was king, there came an incident when David was on the run from Saul. David was in the back of a cave. Saul came into the cave and took a nap. David and his men were further back in the cave. Saul didn't know he was there. And one of David's men, they saw this as an opportunity, and they even said to David, hey, you know what? Somebody asked me a question, aren't the spoils of war considered an increase? Yes, it's considered an increase, but however, there were specific customs about the spoils of war. and where it was given. It wasn't brought to church. It was to be shared with those who stayed behind. So let me say this too. If you're going to teach this as an example of this is why you should tithe, then that means that only if we're following the Mosaic law, only 1% would be given to church, and the rest you go share with your brethren, because that is how it worked where the spoils of war were concerned. This is why I say no one tithes. This is a specific tithe here that was being given that had to do with the spoils of war. And under the Mosaic law, it wasn't 10%. It was only 1% that was to be given to the Levites, and it was 1/10 of 1% that was to be given to the priests, spoils of war, okay, under the Mosaic covenant. So my point here again is that nobody's tithing according to the Mosaic covenant, because if we did, we'd have to bring 10% to the church and then take your check, go home, and go to take your check on Monday morning, go to your boss and say, never let it be said that anyone made me rich. I'm giving you this check back. God's going to bless me. I don't know anybody who does that. Okay. All right. So here's the thing I want to say. Abraham did not lust up to power. He didn't try to fulfill God's promise in his own way. I was talking about David. David was in the back of the cave. One of his men said to him, this is your opportunity. This is exactly what the Lord spoke to you when the Lord said, I will be an enemy to your enemies, and I'm going to give your enemy into your hands, and you can do to him what you wish. He was saying, take Saul out now. Kill him. This is your opportunity. You know God told you you're going to be king. Look, he's in your hands. You can take him out, and we can end this, and we won't be on the run anymore. The Bible says that David wouldn't do that. He says, I cannot touch the Lord's anointed. It's interesting, too, that the guy who was talking to David said, the Lord said, you can do with him as you wish. And David chose not to kill him. David chose not to take him out in order to have the throne. David let Saul leave. And then later on, David let him know, I could have killed you. And I didn't do it. Okay. And there are other examples of this we see within the biblical text, where someone could have had something. God said, no, this is not the way. But we definitely see this with Abram. Abram was promised in chapter 13, all of this land of Canaan, I'm going to give to you and to your descendants. In chapter 14, he conquers the kings who are in charge of the land, but he gives it all back. Here's the thing about Abraham, or Abraham. Abraham, you know, we talked about the 4 cardinal virtues: courage, wisdom, righteousness, self-control. We said by walking in these, this is how God intends for us to flourish. Abraham, as I thought about this and meditated upon it, I thought Abraham walked in these virtues. He walked in courage. He got his 400 men to go get his nephew Lot back. That was courage. Abraham walked in righteousness. What do you say? And he walked in self-control. How do we know this? Number one, he showed righteousness in giving the land back to all of the people. He showed self-control in not keeping it for himself, being ruled by lust, so that he would take the land and he didn't have a lust for power. He didn't keep it for himself. He gave it all back. This showed that he had control over his own desires and passions. It shows that he was righteous and that he did what was right. He did what would be considered magnanimous, and he gave all the land back, all the goods back to the people, and kept nothing for himself. He allowed them to have their own sovereignty. That's righteousness, that's self-control. I said courage. He went and rescued Lot. The last one was wisdom. Because when I read this and I thought about Abram, and I thought about David, I went, how did they know? How did David know? David took the wisdom route. He took the righteous route. He didn't kill Saul when he could have. How did he know to do that? And it hit me. It is the wisdom of virtue. When you walk in virtue, you develop wisdom to make the right decisions that please God. And so this is why it's so important. So Abram, like David, walked in the 4 virtues that bring about flourishing. He walked in courage. He rescued Lot. He walked in righteousness and self-control. He didn't have a lust for power. He didn't keep all the land, but he gave it all back. That was the right thing. That was the righteous thing to do. And he walked in wisdom. He had the wisdom to know this is not the way for me to fulfill the promise of God. David had the wisdom to know to kill Saul is not the way for me to fulfill the promise of God. See, this is something that Jacob lacked. God gave Jacob's mother a promise. The elders shall serve the younger. But as you saw, if you go read that story, they try to fulfill that themselves. They deceived Isaac in order to, and Jacob deceived Esau to get the birthright. That was not God's way. God used it, but it wasn't God's way. It wasn't God's way. And so we see here in Abraham, who is our father Abraham, we see him walking in honor. We see him walking in courage, wisdom, righteousness, and self-control, to walk in such a way where he shows faithfulness to God, and it is faith that pleases God. So the lesson we should take to Abraham is trusting in God, walking in virtue, walking in wisdom and righteousness, self-control and courage, so that we can possess the wisdom to make the right decision and not try to make things happen in our own way, in our own strength, in ways that would be displeasing to God. That's what we can learn from Abraham in this story. I'll share with you one thing before we go. Karen and I were talking about this earlier. Karen and I have at times have had to make decisions where we could have done things to advance ourselves, and not necessarily in some circumstances been wrong. But there was a situation where Karen and I were part of a ministry, and technically speaking, we got banished, we got excommunicated, because we took a stand on something that was not right. I won't go into details here, but we took a stand on something that was not right. And I was told, do not return to this fellowship ever again. Don't show up to any of our events unless you are expressly invited. So I was told not to come back. Okay. I could have, and then what was also happening was the leadership involved started to spread lies about Karen and I. Our name, especially my name, or Karen too, our name got dragged through the mud. We were accused of stealing people. We were accused of taking material, stealing material. None of it was true. And I knew some stuff. And I thought I could go out there and start saying things to protect myself and to show that this person is in the wrong, and they were in the wrong. But Karen and I both felt number one, we shouldn't say anything. We just felt like God's like, nope, don't say anything. Number two, you don't have any actual proof. Let me say this. This person had left faith in Christ. They had left faith in Christ and didn't tell anybody. So they were still doing their fellowship, but they no longer believed in Jesus as the Son of God, as the way of God into salvation. They didn't believe it, but didn't tell anybody. I knew this, and I questioned them about it. This is why I got kicked out. We didn't say anything. We didn't go out. We didn't start. And this person thought we were going to do that. They thought we were going to go out and say a bunch of stuff. We decided to stay quiet. We felt like that's what the Lord was telling us to do. We stayed quiet. We went through a season where our name got dragged through the mud. We went through a season where things were said about me that were not true. And I had never had that happen to me before. And I hated it. But God used it to teach me, to perfect me. Long story short, God turned it all around. This person and what they were doing, it came out, it got exposed. People saw the truth. By the way, people cut Karen and I off during that time. People unfriended us on Facebook. People stopped talking to us. They wouldn't return our phone calls. All this happened. But then, I don't know, it was 6 months later or so, we kept doing what we were doing. We ended up starting our fellowship, which is now the Oasis, during that time period. And then it changed. Not instantly, but it changed. And then people saw the truth, and people began coming back and apologizing. We would get a phone call. I remember one phone call in particular. They called us, and this family that we had known that was a part of this fellowship, they were crying, saying, please forgive us. We were made to think so evil of you. Please forgive us. And long story short, what ended up happening is because of the stance we took, we were endeavoring as best as we understood, following the leadership of the Lord, to walk in virtue, to not go out and try to protect ourselves by destroying the other person. We didn't do it. And God vindicated us. It all came out. It was like the story of Joseph. You know how Joseph went through all that stuff, and then God vindicated him? People came back to us. We reestablished relationships. We sat down with people, and this person went on their way and did what they were supposed to do, did what they did. But, and here's the big thing. This is what I want to say, because this was the big thing for me. People came to us. We were used of God, because when people found out that this person had left the faith, people were hurt. People felt betrayed. Guess where they started coming to get some healing? It was the oasis. One of the reasons we're called the oasis is to be a place for people to heal. And so they started coming back, and they felt they could trust us because of the way we handled ourselves. That's the point I'm trying to make here. When you walk in virtue, you flourish. You flourish not only in terms of just finances, even though that's what we're talking about, but you flourish in such a way that you become someone that people can trust. To me, I hold trust, the trust of other people, to be sacred. I hold it to be sacred. But that comes, the reason people trust you is because you live your life a certain way. So my final message to you from out of this story to Abraham is, I don't think you can really follow Abraham's example here. But what you can do is follow his example of virtue, of righteousness, of courage, of self-control, to walk a virtuous, righteous life so that you become someone that people say, I can trust you. This is someone that I can go to. This is someone that I know I am safe with. Amen. I hope you got something out of this message today. As we've talked about tithing before the law, Abraham's tithe. I hope this is something that was a benefit to you. If so, share this with other people, as I ask you to do every week. I will be uploading this up to our YouTube channel, CCTD TV. You can find that on YouTube. You can direct them there. It should be there by tomorrow morning, and they can watch this. I hope this benefited you. If it did, let me know in the comments section for those of you watching by Facebook. And Lord willing, we will see you next week. For all of you in the Zoom room, God bless you. Karen and I love you. And Lord willing, we'll see you all next week also. Bye-bye.